Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am A.A. Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Jennifer Celeste Briggs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't we just start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, by trade, I'm a massage therapist and Alexander Technique teacher. And then by decision to be a parent, I am a mother of two daughters, one of whom has special needs.
Awesome. What was the second thing you said after massage? Alexander technique? What's
Alexander
that?
Technique teacher. Yeah. And that's about how people notice themselves in their bodies and notice what they're doing and sort of interface with their world. And that actually has influenced my parenting, including with Sarah, to really stay present with myself and at ease in my body to help me be at ease in how I interact with her.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a great thing because I have a daughter obviously with disability and needing to be present almost all the time around her when I'm caring for her that's important. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Let's start off with what is your definition of inclusion?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I think where my daughter is now is a beautiful example of it, where her school has a specialized program and they include her in the mainstream as it seems like it makes sense for her on any given day. And I love that individual decision making because she really does need time in a quieter room, just one-on-one. And she can go to art class, she can be in the musicals. And I love that they make that decision about inclusion not on a group basis, but on the individual basis.
Yeah, I love that. That is very important because often it seems like either there isn't inclusion or there is, and it's like everybody is one or the other. So yeah, I love that. That's the way it should be. It should be individualized. So that's great that it's working out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just released a book. When we're recording this, it was a week ago it came out. What inspired you to write Watching Sarah Rise and share your deeply personal journey with everybody?
When I started running the Sunrise program for Sarah, she was 4, and we called it Sarah Rise. And I started writing weekly updates to my parents. And that over the year grew and grew. And then eventually I turned it into a blog. And people who would read my weekly updates and blog entries would say, "Oh, when are you going to write a book?" And then during the pandemic, it finally came together to write a book. Mainly, I wanted to share our story and how things felt so hard in the beginning. And then we did this thing that helped her language just start coming faster than anything we had tried before. And it helped with so many skills. And it was such a loving approach to being with her and helping her. And I wanted people to know that that exists and that the Sunrise program exists, because what insurance covers is ABA, or applied behavior analysis.
Okay.
And that is also usually the approach of schools. The Sunrise program is really family run, family centered. And so that is possibly why it's not heard of as much.
Yeah. Can you explain maybe a little bit more about what it is and how you adapted it into like the Sarah Rise program?
Yeah, it is an approach to connecting with people with autism or other special needs to follow their lead in a really loving, non-pressured way, following their interests, not stopping repetitive behaviors, all of which is going towards the goal of connection and fostering language and ease with interacting socially.
Okay. So this is something I'm curious about. Like, what was your experience with special needs or disability like before your daughter was born?
Hardly any. I
Okay.
remember going on field trips when I was in school, sometimes to go help or play with kids that were in a specialized school, but I really did not have very much.
Okay.
Most of my work was actually with adults in terms of massage and Alexander Technique teaching. And then I was really surprised when I realized, oh, hang on, I now have a kid with special needs. How did that happen?
Right.
This was not the plan.
Yeah.
But it has brought the most amazing loving, wonderful team of people into our life. So even if I could go back and change it, I would not.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a similar, growing up, I don't ever remember hearing like about disability, and I don't remember, I went to a Christian school through 8th grade, and there was nobody like in a wheelchair, any of that stuff there. And then when I went to the high school, I don't remember talking about special education, any of that stuff, until my daughter was born. So yeah, for me too, it was just like, okay, this is like a whole new parallel universe that I didn't know existed really, but it does exist. And yeah, when you're in it, I wouldn't change it. Well, I mean, I would change pieces of it, I guess. Well, not my daughter, but like how the world interacts with her in certain situations. But yeah, I was similar. Didn't know anything about it, so I had to figure it out or learn from other people. So that's interesting. Um, how did you get to like the Sunrise program, or were you trying other stuff and stuff wasn't working, or how did you get to that spot?
We did a ton of therapies, all the early
Okay.
intervention, speech, OT, PT. We tried horseback riding therapy, water therapy, conductive education, a not Banyel method lessons. We had a speech therapist come to the house in addition to me taking Sarah elsewhere. We had a nutritionist coming because she was diagnosed as failure to thrive. I had actually heard about the Sunrise program years prior when I was in college, and my stepdad and mom gave me a copy of the book by Barry Neil Kaufman called Sunrise,
Okay.
about the original Sunrise son and what his parents did to help him. And I was blown away by that book. I thought it was incredible. I even thought, oh gosh, this sounds like an amazing thing to do. Maybe I
Yeah.
would like to do this with someone someday. But then it wasn't the first thing I turned to when things were difficult with Sarah. Mainly, the first difficulty was getting her to eat enough. And then was she going to raise her head in tummy time and things like that? And could we help her learn to walk? But once she was walking and eating better, then we were able to think, how can we help support her more? And then I thought, let me go get trained at the Autism Treatment Center of America, learn to run a Sunrise program and get that going, which was a huge, huge undertaking. I
Yeah.
had to have help even just to go do the training because you don't take your kids there. And
Okay.
then to set up the program, I wanted to have volunteers. I had a younger daughter who was still a baby, so I needed someone to be with her when I was with Sarah. And I found volunteers to also work with Sarah. So she got a lot of one-on-one time.
That's interesting. So, I believe you live in Pennsylvania. So where did you have to go then for the training? Like out of state, or was it nearby, or?
I went to Western Massachusetts for the training. Now, thanks to changes with the COVID pandemic, you can actually train online or
Okay.
you can go in person. I was very glad to be there in person because there's something about being in a room full of other parents
Right.
going through the same thing. But I also think you can get that online. I'm part of a parenting support group now with people from all over the world, and you still get
Right.
that feeling of community.
Yeah. That's great. My daughter, she has epilepsy. So when she was younger, we connected with the Epilepsy Foundation in Minnesota, and I know what you're talking about because we would go to events with other families, and it's something about being able to be in a room where you don't really need to explain yourself. You just are there, and people can understand it. So, I mean, I'm gonna date myself, but it's like curious to go where everybody knows your name and they're glad you came. So
That's right.
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So it sounds like um the Sunrise thing was more stuff like your family like initiated. Like how does school interact with that? Were they open to like being on board with going, kind of following the same stuff? Or can you talk a little bit about the school interaction with it?
At that point, Sarah was only in preschool a few mornings a
Okay.
week. So when I got back from my training, I started working with her differently in the afternoons, just how I interacted, how I asked for language, how I would play with her.
Sure.
And then we were moving to a new house, so I didn't really get going for a few months. Um, and basically, I didn't try to integrate it with her
Okay.
school. I told them what we were doing, but
Sure.
I wasn't trying to blend the two. Then when it was time for her to go to kindergarten, that would have been full time. And I thought, whoa, I think she's getting more from
Okay.
our Sunrise time than the input she's getting at school in terms of helping her language and connection.
Sure.
So then I pulled her out of school and she was fully at home. And then I found a local preschool. I mean, I guess she'd been at a local preschool before, but I found a different preschool that was not run by the public school system. It was just a private school in the basement of a church. And after months of her being at home full time, then I talked to them about, could she come like one morning a week with a helper? And my sister-in-law went along. She moved across the country from Seattle to be my full-time helper. And then she would go with Sarah to preschool and try to stay back. But then if Sarah needed one-on-one attention, she could be there. And so Sarah was in that preschool for a few years, just increasing how many days, but it was always just 9 to noon. And then she'd come home and we could still get several hours of Sarah Rise time.
Wow. That's awesome. You moved all the way across the country to help you. That's very nice.
Yeah. And I had a fleet of volunteers that some of them came and stayed with me for years. Some would come and help for a few months, but a lot of them are still a part of our life today.
That's awesome. How did you go about building that community of volunteers that would help Sarah and you guys?
I started just by sending out an email to people I knew in Pittsburgh and friends and family that lived elsewhere, but I thought might have connections. And I said, hey, here's what we're doing. I would love to have your help if you want to play with Sarah. I'm looking for 2 to 4 hours a week, plus 2 hours once a month for a team meeting. If you would like to play with Amy, any amount of time is useful, but a 2-hour chunk would be ideal so that I can then be with Sarah. Amy is my youngest and definitely needed someone with her as she was moving through babyhood on up. And I also said, hey, if you want to make a meal instead, that would be great, because then that's one less thing I'm dealing with. And I got people interested in doing all of that. And I reached out to the Friendship Circle, which is an organization that pairs neurotypical teens with kids with special needs to go once a week and play. And I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you have any teen who might be interested in being trained in this way? And they did. And he came and volunteered with Sarah. And he was so moved by the experience that he gave a presentation to his high school class. And one of his classmates reached out to me saying, hey, can I be a part of that? So it really grew by word of mouth in ways that I didn't expect.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you explain maybe a little bit about like the Sarah Rise, or when you're interacting with her, like how you're interacting like differently to, work with her strengths and interests to help her grow?
Yeah. The first thing I learned was that I needed to give her more time to respond to me, because sometimes I would ask her a question, and if she didn't respond in 2 seconds, I would decide she wasn't going to. And now I know, even now as she's almost 18, I need to count in my head to 20 seconds. And sometimes it takes that long, and then she'll answer right as I'm giving up. I also learned to make it easy for her to look at my face and my mouth when I was talking, which sounds so obvious, but I hadn't thought of it before, that I needed to be down really at her level if I was going to talk to her and ask her something, instead of being standing and being up high. And then one of the big ideas of Sunrise is to not stop a repetitive behavior, but to join it, that is your pathway to connection rather than a barrier to connection. And so if she wanted to open and close a lid, then I would sit nearby so that she could look at me if she wanted to. And I had a container just like hers, and we would open and close the lid together for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And then she might look at me and be ready to interact or learn a word or whatever. That was my moment to then jump in and say something or do something or celebrate her for looking at me. And so we spent a lot of time, either me or the volunteers, just silently being together, but being really present, so that we were a constant invitation, a very friendly invitation to connect, but we never forced it.
That's very interesting. So is this a program where you have to like start implementing it when they're young, or can you like start using some of these techniques like when they're older as well?
I know there have been families who did it with their grown adult children. It can be used with people who have language and maybe who don't have any. And sometimes at any age, you could have someone who's 30 start talking for the first time, or someone who is Sarah's age who's 4 and you do it for a few years and maybe they don't ever learn to speak.
Right.
That's not in the cards for them. But then
Yeah.
maybe you figure out a different way for them to communicate, like the letter boards or signing or
Mhm.
the picture boards.
Yeah, because when you talked about like asking a question, then I mean, for me, it's the same thing where I ask my daughter something, and then I mean, it does take her a little longer to process stuff, but I still, if like I'm in a, I don't know, for I'm conditioned, but if somebody, ask a question, you're waiting for them to like respond really quickly, and then if he doesn't, I'll, ask again. So when you said like waiting and like 20 seconds, I was like, wow, that's a long time. But I mean, I know I should be doing that, so I need to do more of just like intentionally asking a question and then just waiting for her to answer instead of answering for her or making assumptions about what she wants. So that's very interesting. Yeah, because I don't know what it is, but like you ask a question, they're used to people answering it quickly. So then if somebody does it, you're like, I need to ask again because they're not talking.
Right. Right. And I think that's true with neurotypical kids
Yeah.
too, maybe even adults that
Yeah.
we're so eager to move on. But a lot of the time someone might ask me something and I'll say
Right.
what, and then my brain finishes processing what they said and I'm able to
Right.
just answer.
Yep. No, yeah, that is also true. Like, yeah, you ask a question and then you're yeah. A lot of life too for me is just, I mean, when I'm busy, like, and don't have time to like, slow down, have this time where I can spend with my daughter and just focus on her, be in the moment. Like, you can tell when I'm not in that headspace during a day versus, when I have not, my brain's clear, I'm not looking at my phone, just focusing on time with her, it makes a huge difference. So, I mean, I know I have to do it. It's just making sure that I get myself in that space, when I'm interacting with her. So great reminders for sure.
Yeah, it really helped me to have the room. I know
Yeah.
having a special playroom was to help the kid focus as
Yeah.
well and to be really simple without lots of stuff all
Yeah.
on the walls, not tons of toys. But I think it helped me to go in there and
Yeah.
shut the door and be like, "I'm not answering the phone.
Right.
I don't even have my phone with me," or
Right.
"I'm not seeing the pile of mail and dishes. There's
Yeah.
nothing I'm doing for these next 2 hours except being in this room."
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a big difference. And I have similar stuff where I've been to Haiti 3 times, like on mission trips. And part of the reason I like Haiti is just like there's way less choices. I mean, here, if it's time for a meal, like you could have literally almost endless options of what you want. Down there, it's like, well, we're just having the chicken we killed this morning and rice for supper. I'm like, cool. I don't have to think. I mean, that's what they're making. I'm either eating or not. Like, but the amount of many choices we have, I think it makes me more anxious. I know for sure, or just the clutter and all the different things. So it makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah. What surprised you the most about the process of entering Sarah's world and using therapeutic play to connect with her?
I think how quickly her language came when I asked for more, because I had been always leaping into action if she gave the slightest sound, because she could say every sound of the letters of the alphabet. She just wasn't putting them together.
Okay.
So if she said and made the sign for milk, then I knew she meant milkshake. And after years of trying to get her to eat enough, I would leap up and run to make a milkshake. And after I did my training, I said, "Oh, you want a milkshake? Can you try saying the whole word?" And
Mm-hmm.
then I waited and I waited and I kept looking at her, knowing that she could do it or believing, trying to give her
Right.
that message that, hey, I believe in you and you can do this. And then she stumbled through and said, shh.
Yeah.
And then I went nuts and ran around celebrating her and I got the milkshake, but it was like, oh my gosh, I just changed
Right.
this one tiny thing of how I asked for something and gave her more time. And all of a sudden, we got more of a word than
Right.
ever before. And we've been doing so much speech therapy and everything. And here in this one moment, it just felt like something was changing.
Right. That's interesting. That's awesome. I mean, for me, my daughter, I call her, she's somewhat nonverbal, so I can understand her most of the time. But if you meet her for the first time, you probably can't. But then sometimes she'll just say a sentence, use a word I've never heard before, like a complicated word, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. You just used that correctly in context, and yeah, so those moments are pretty cool. And yeah, child shows you something that you haven't seen before, for sure.
Yeah.
How did your journey with Sarah impact you personally and as a parent and an individual?
I think it pushed me more to my limits than I ever knew.
Mm-hmm.
In all the hard ways and in all the good ways. I became a much better cook because we did the GAPS diet with her, which is a protocol to heal a leaky gut. And that meant making everything from scratch.
Okay.
And so then when she wanted pizza and we were grain free, well, then I got a bag of freeze dried peas and I ground them up to make a pea flour and compressed that and made a pizza from that, which was nothing like a normal pizza. But so I think there was a lot of creativity that I hadn't known I had and determination to keep doing it. And to keep clearing out my own emotional junk that I didn't necessarily know I was carrying around.
Right.
And then, oh, if I don't, then, well, and we still have our moments where we clash with each other because we both are strong-willed. And but if I can go away and look at my own beliefs that I'm carrying about myself, of maybe I'm thinking I'm a bad parent, and so when she says no to something I've asked, then that feels like it's proof that I'm a bad parent. But if I can really get to a point of believing I'm a good parent and she says no, well, then maybe I can playfully work with that and just ask in a new way and not get so caught up. And sometimes that's through thinking about my beliefs and talking to other people. The Autism Treatment Center of America helps parents talk through and asks questions to help you notice what you're thinking. And sometimes it is sitting on the kitchen floor and crying, or talking to my mom and crying and being like, this all feels really, really hard. I don't have the answer, but if I get out the feelings, then I can think more clearly and be creative again.
Yeah, that's great. Just hearing you talk so far when we've been interacting, like you seem like a person that's very open to like new things or learning new things. Like what was that part of the way you were brought up, where you were kind of more open to trying different things and new things, or how did you get to that spot?
I think it probably was some of both. For helping Sarah, it was like, well, here we have this difficult situation. Let's just keep trying everything or anything. Although certainly there were things that I heard about where I thought, that doesn't feel like it's right for her or our family. I was raised by parents who knew the importance of letting a person have their feelings, and that maybe you don't need to punish a kid because they are having a hard time and yelling and screaming. Maybe you need to sit with them on your lap and help them get all the tears out. And then you don't have to even say anything. They just suddenly are ready to do the thing that you asked of them.
Yeah. That's great. I was raised where we didn't talk about anything, which is not good. Obviously, you get older and then you don't know how to talk about stuff. So that's awesome that you were, interesting to me, like how people like were raised or their interaction with, disability, and how that kind of shines through or shows up when, you have a child with a disability. So, yeah. What lessons do you hope readers will take away from your memoir, particularly parents of children with autism?
I think that you can be a really imperfect parent and lose your temper and mess up over and over and over again, not be the ideal parent you want to be. And you can still have these moments where you do interact cleanly, clearly, creatively, and make a difference. And that could be a really big difference.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, for sure. Yeah, and for me too, like as a parent, so I have a son. He was born, and then 15 months later, my daughter was born. So he was more on the gifted side. So we had that side, and then my daughter. So that was my first interaction. So it was two different, scenarios, for sure. So it was very interesting. You talked a little bit about school, like how has school gone for her? How is, it's beyond the IEP, and how has that whole process been for your family?
So you were asking about the IEP? Is that what I?
Yes.
heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just more like, how is she on the IEP, or how has that process gone for you guys?
Yeah, she is. And that was an interesting transition from me being in charge of running a program
Yeah.
to Now she's back in school and
Yep.
okay, how can I still vouch for her and still feel like I know things and share things? So the main thing I always remind them in the IEP meetings is to give her time to answer.
Right.
Otherwise, I know many parents go through experiences where they feel like they have to fight in the IEP meetings to get the care that their child needs. Luckily, I have never felt that. I have felt like the schools were really thinking about her well, and they do want to consult with me. And if she has a hard day, I get a call. It's not necessarily that they're calling to say, hey, your kid was bad. It's they're like, wow, okay, Sarah just had a really hard time in this class. What do you think is going on?
Right.
How do you think we should adapt? And she recently switched schools because she was at one that went through 8th and then it stopped. And so then she's
Okay.
at a new one, but they talk to each other because they're all part of the bigger program. So
Right.
when she was struggling, then the new teacher talked to the old teacher and said, oh, we better get a hammock for the room because the hammock swing helps Sarah
Yeah.
regain her equilibrium when she's upset. And I wasn't even part of that discussion, but I was really moved by it.
That's great. Sounds like you have a great team at school for her, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. In your experience, what misconceptions about autism or autism therapies do you hope to challenge with your story?
I think that anything repetitive needs to be stopped and that it's a barrier to interacting when actually that is the way in. And often the repetitiveness is doing something useful for the child or the adult. Like for Sarah, she would button and unbutton someone's shirt over and over, or we had a little toy that was buttons and a zipper board and everything, and she would do it over and over and over before she was able to do it on her own clothes. But then she could do it on her own clothes. So it's like, well, hey, that's repetitive and exclusive, but
Right.
what amazing practice.
Yeah. That's a great mindset shift on something or what the child's doing for sure. Yeah. What do you think the future holds for innovative family-driven approaches to autism, and how can your book contribute to that conversation?
I would love it if families knew about this idea of an approach and felt confident that even if their life seems way too busy, they can't possibly, to know that you can do it in a way that matches what makes sense for your family. So you could do lifestyle the way I started of you just are changing how you're thinking a tiny bit about how to interact with your kid. Or you could do 30 to 60 hours a week if that makes sense and that help is out there and that you don't have to feel like you have to do it all on your own. I was able to go out and see massage clients while I had one volunteer with Amy and one volunteer with Sarah. And so, yeah, it was a lot to keep track of, but it was possible.
Yeah, that's great. But you have to be flexible, it sounds like. You have to be willing to be a little flexible, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. That's great. What is one tip you can share today to help our listeners be more inclusive? Just something simple they can start doing today to be more inclusive.
Maybe it would just be when you notice someone who seems a little different, to observe without judgment and to assume that that person is quite possibly very aware of everything that's going on, even if they're not able to express it or behave in a way that makes it look like they are. Because I think Sarah, sometimes she can have her head down, she can be looking at a fabric pattern and pressing on it, but she hears what we're saying. And so then she'll respond, she'll interject into the conversation and it's like, oh, right. It looks like she's in her own world,
Right.
but she is actually still paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, kids, yeah, when they don't look, I mean, each kids and adults, even if they don't look like they're engaged or listening, most people are listening. So yeah, that's great. That's a great tip. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't think so. This was really great. Thank you.
Yeah. You ready for the last question?
Sure.
Do you like Spam lunch meat, yes or no?
Okay, this is embarrassing. I've never had it.
You've never had it? Oh,
No.
man. Yeah, it was funny. Yeah. Since I'm in Austin, Minnesota, where the Spam Museum is located, I ask all my guests that just like kind of as a fun question. It's actually like very, very tied, it's pretty much tied yes or no, but it's always usually a strong yes or a strong no or a no, I haven't had it, are basically the three answers I get. So you have to try it.
I can say I've been in Austin, and that if the wind is blowing a certain way, that the
Yeah,
whole area smells like Spam.
that is true. Yeah, there's certain days that smell like that. There's certain days which is I like better is when they're making bacon or something. You can smell that part, but yeah, you can definitely smell it for sure. Actually, one more question. Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
My website is watchingsarahrise.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Jennifer Celeste Briggs and Jennifer Celeste Briggs author.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
To those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.